Hey, we want to welcome everybody to another episode of You and the Law Podcast Show. Boy, man, that was a good intro, wasn't it, brother?
It was all right.
It was all right. You know who put that together?
You did, because if I had put it together, it would have been everybody would have been you'd have been up dancing.
Man, you know
It
what?
was good. It was good, man. Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
pat
that's a good
yourself on
intro,
the
man.
pat
That's a good
yourself on the
intro.
back, man. Pat
Yeah,
yourself
yeah,
on
I'm
the
patting
back, bro.
myself on the back. Yeah, yeah. So if you're out there listening to us, uh, as we're streaming live on Facebook Live, or as we are streaming live on our YouTube channel or our LinkedIn channel. Uh, Put your comments in the chat room if you like that intro. So I am one of the co-hosts of the show, Virgil Green, and as always, this I've got to give this introduction to the brother who sits beside me, not below me, but beside me, and he goes now by the name of Chief Swaggy One, the Beast.
One swaggy, one the beast. Not all
Hey,
those swaggies, just
Hey
one
man,
swaggy.
I'm just trying to hype it up. Hype you
Man,
up,
whatever, dude.
you know, the
Okay, man.
swaggy, the
Okay,
swag.
bro. Okay, bro.
Hey man, we've got another great informative topic that we're going to be talking about tonight, and we're going to be talking about our community outreach programs created by default or design. Keith, this is a topic that hopefully will our listeners will engage with us on, because across the country there are a lot of communities that are looking to implement programs that don't currently exist because of a reaction to what has happened in policing, whether these are alternative response uh, programs or related to mental health, or whether these are diversion programs related to how to deal with youth um, crimes in the communities. And Keith, one of the things that concerns me is that uh, anytime programs like this come about, there's a lot of money that is put into these programs. Some nonprofit organizations or different corporations says, "Hey, we're gonna give $10 million, or we're giving $30 million," and now all of a sudden, organizations come up and say, "Hey, we want to implement this program in our communities," and there's nothing that really uh, is there to say if these programs are going to be successful. But there's a lot of money put in them. I think there's a lot of good intent, Keith, and I think as we talk about this topic tonight, uh, what is default and what is design?
Yeah, so Virgil, yeah, that's a good point. But before we get started, our prayers go out to the state of Maine, the two cities where there was once again there was two separate mass shootings, and basically it was in one episode. But I'll tell you, so far 18 people have lost their lives and numerous others injured. And this person's still on the run. So I want to say prayers out to that community, to those families. I was listening to one little girl today who was grazed by a bullet, and her thing is why? Why is this happening? She said, "I never
Hmm.
thought in my life, 10 years old, I
Yeah,
never thought in my life that I would have to go through or witness something like that," and that was just heartbreaking for me. But to the families and to the cities and to those law enforcement men and women who are out there actively searching for this person. Um,
yeah, Keith.
Virgil,
Man, when I saw come up on my cell phone last night, and I think last night it said 22 people 22 fatalities and over 50 people, injured. I just couldn't, just kind of like, wow, here we go again. And I immediately turned on to watch CNN and some other, other news, and it was, obviously the breaking news last night, and still is the breaking news today. And again, man, this is something we've talked about on this podcast show so often about, just the sporadic gun violence, and it sounds like this uh, guy who is a person of interest, who's been identified, our
Man,
military.
there's not in no personal interest, man. He's the suspect.
He is a suspect, and that he is prior military, and that he had uh, obviously said something to some people that he was experiencing some type of mental health crises, and the next thing they know, here this guy is walking into a bowling alley and other places, just randomly shooting and killing. 18 people is a there's a lot of people in different locations. As you mentioned, this 10-year-old girl.
Right.
We become a
Well,
society, Keith, where our schools, our kids, this generation of kids have had to deal with school shooting and school violence, something that you and I didn't have to experience. And I don't believe my older kids, and now even my younger kids, had to experience uh, while they were going to school, or we had to experience as parents.
Virgil, I tell you, when I saw this last night, and I saw the headlines come across, I actually thought this was what was going on overseas with the war when it stated this many deaths
Yeah, because
until
of
I
what's
was
going on
able
in
to
Israel.
see.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then I finally narrowed it down to the fact, oh my goodness, this is happening up north.
Yeah.
But it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And, I always say that when a person wants to devastate this nation, involve kids. When you want to be the center of attention and get attention, or you're trying to shock the soul of a nation, involve kids. Kids have to be kids are involved in the tragedy. And this is what you have. You have kids who were uh, at an event, a social event, and so anytime. And if you notice now, we're these type of incidents are occurring in smaller cities. We expect these type of incidents, or there's an expectation that these type of incidents will occur in major urban cities.
Urban City. Yeah.
But we're starting to see them in smaller cities, and one has to wonder: is this because I believe these were targeted locations. Because based on the way that this was done, I don't think this was random. I think he basically targeted these locations. That's my opinion. It doesn't
Hmm.
mean that that's facts,
Yeah.
but you would think that I would think that this is occurring because there are not the resources, medical resources and emergency resources, first responder resources in these cities. And I believe that when you have someone that does something like this, his main focus is to shock the nation to the core, shock that community to the core, shock, put so much shock in people's hearts and minds that they can't fathom what's actually going on. And so that's what is so disturbing about this, is that you can't even go to a bowling alley with your children. You can't even go out to a restaurant with your family and not be in fear that something like this is going to occur.
Yeah.
So those individuals that were victims of this did not wake up yesterday morning thinking that this was going to happen, that they were going to be shot, they were going to be killed. Their families did not think of this. But this person, no doubt in my mind, this person planned this. This
Calculated.
person
Yeah.
calculated,
Yeah.
planned, and we can talk about. Um, he spent some time in a mental hospital, 2 weeks. The question is going to be, how did he buy the weapons? Was he discharged from the military? They say he's a weapons expert, a firearms instructor, so he has
Farms.
that
Yeah.
tactical advantage. The question is going to be how and when did he buy the weapons? Were the weapons purchased by someone else? Were the weapons purchased prior to his mental diagnosis? It's going to be interesting to see, but one thing we're not going to do tonight is we're not going to use our platform to talk about this person. If we're going to use it, it's going to be to send condolences out to the families.
Yeah.
But Bertie, you were talking earlier. The topic tonight is community outreach programs created by default or design, and I want the listeners and the viewers to think about what that really means. Um, it's like community oriented policing and 21st century policing, and anyone can say that they're doing those things because to say you're doing them is by default in some cases.
Yeah.
But what can you design for your respective community that meets the needs of your respective community? Because when it comes to community outreach programs, when it comes to any kind of community programs, whether it's a law enforcement program, whether it's a social whatever, every program has to meet the needs of their respective cities.
Correct.
Well, it can't be a can. So when you're talking about default, that's basically saying, well, I'm going to take something that you heard the why and reinvent the wheel. And so you have those programs that are started based on the fact that they're already out there. We don't want to we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's already there. It's okay to do that, but you have to tweak it a lot of times to meet the needs of your city. You can't create a program, a community outreach program that was utilized in New York. It's not going to meet the needs of a city and a population of 10,000.
No.
Number one, you're not going to have the financial resources to do it. You may not even have
well,
the
Keith, even
other
if you have the
resources to
financial
do it.
resources,
Well,
it's still not going to.
well, Virgil, this is the thing. Everyone doesn't have the passion and the heart to do these programs.
Correct.
Okay, so it's easy to say, well, we're doing this. Let's check off the box. Here's a box, let's check it. Instead of saying we're going to create a program and check off each box as we go, you have individuals that already have the boxes created and they check them off just to say we got them. Why not design it and check each box as you design it based on the needs of that community?
Yeah. Well, and Keith, and I think, if part of this conversation and we talk about something created by default or design, and as you just mentioned, something that may work in New York may not work in Oklahoma City, which is a major city. Doesn't
Right.
mean it's going to work there, but does something that's going to work in, say, in Oklahoma City is going to work in Norman, Oklahoma.
No,
Uh,
absolutely not. Absolutely not.
and so the one thing that I've thought about over the last year or so is that after the death of George Floyd, Keith, and to our listeners, so many corporations and so many other organizations have said we're going to get behind and we're going to support initiative that's going to change policing or reimagining policing, and we're going to fund some programs. Well, where were these programs at before the death of George Floyd? And I think that's something that I have really that has really disturbed me, Keith, over the last year or so, especially since I've been up here, up north, up here in the Minneapolis area, is that everything is being done after the death of George Floyd, but nothing was being done before. Now, there was probably some programs that were put in place, but after the death of George Floyd, all of a sudden, here comes the reimagining of public safety. And what does that look like? Uh, uh, we need to make sure we put uh, co other co-responses into mental health, or we need to put in diversion programs for youthful offenders. But where were all these programs before? And I think to me, Keith, and I don't know, to the listeners, when you are continually to talk about something that was tragic at the death of George Floyd, but we didn't talk about these things before the death of George Floyd. We didn't talk about these things when Eric Garner was killed. We didn't talk about these things just in our last week's topic when we talked about the 2019 death of Elijah McClain.
I,
And
I
Keith,
beg to
one thing
differ
I
with
want to,
you. I
huh?
beg to differ. I beg to differ with you. Because each and every one of those incidents, let's go back to 2015, and if we want to go back to Trayvon Martin, there were initiatives there were initiatives that were put in place throughout the nation by police departments. Case in point, Michael Brown situation. I know for a fact the city of St. Louis. If you ever read
The
the
Ferguson
Ferguson
report.
After Action report,
Yeah.
it talks about programs that were put in place to address excessive force and to address procedural justice. So when I say I beg to differ with you, I hear what you're saying. But Virgil, here we go again. We've done this. We've done this. Let's go back to community oriented policing. Weed and seed. It sounded really good. It sounded good. It got departments
For those who don't know
grants.
about Weed and Seed,
Well,
talk,
community
give a
oriented.
little
Yeah,
history about what Weed and Seed was supposed to be a good program. But in my opinion, Keith, Weed and Seed was once again about money, and it gave police departments the ability to put in some specialized groups
it did.
to target
It did.
certain communities.
And so when we talk about weed and seed, basically you go into an area, you weed out the problems, and then you replant more positive programs. So when you hear that word weed and seed, that's what that means. And the reason I know about it is because I was leaving the end of my career in Fort Worth, and that's when the community oriented policing really started, and the
Mm-hmm.
city received a lot of federal funding for overtime and community programs, all night basketball. Well, not all night basketball, but to have recreation centers open and have officers there. And the purpose was to play basketball with the kids and then assign officers to specific beats. And that was that officer's responsibility. All sound good, but that was funded for a short period of time. Maybe 3 years of federal government would provide that money. Now, what happened is after 3 years, that money was no longer provided by the government. So now the cities would have to be able to sustain that. And a lot were unable to sustain trying to, because now what you've got to do is you've got to take those officers back because you can't sustain that, or you have to scale down. Which, if you've got a big flourishing program, now you got to scale down, something's going to suffer. And so I do believe a lot of those programs uh, uh, were created by default because they look good. We want this federal money. We want to be able to get on TV and say that we're doing this. We want to be able to get on TV and say that we believe in this program and this is what we've done to help reduce. Let's go back. Dare.
There, yeah.
Dare had the potential of being one of the most positive programs in the nation. The problem with Dare was it did not target the group of the kids that it needed to be targeted. It was the kids, I believe, up to the fifth grade. It might even go on to, I can't really
I
remember.
don't
I
want to
think
say
it
up to the
was
seventh grade or
maybe
sixth
up to
grade.
seventh grade.
Yeah,
It was a great program.
yeah,
But what happened after seventh grade or eighth grade, when the kids started going to high school, there was not a continuation of it, and
yeah.
then it stopped being funded. And so when it stopped being funded and departments couldn't sustain it, now there's no programs out there. Now there were some departments that were able to sustain some form of DARE,
Mm-hmm.
but the DARE platform, the way that it really was, the way that it really was supposed to be, I remember that was a really good program. If it had been formulated right, and if it had hit the right target, if it had been a continuating program, I
Mm-hmm.
think it would have helped. But it was defunded. So I'd say you have these now. Design is a to me is a program that's created for the needs of that respective community, understanding that you have to sustain it, understanding that you may not receive federal funds, you may not have the departmental funds, but you're going to find the funding, alternative funding, to And if you can't, then you're going to find ways to keep it going, because if it's designed right, it's going to be effective.
Yeah.
But if you don't, so that's to me a difference of understanding that we've got to create this program and we ought to be able to sustain it. And
Yeah.
we've got to bring all these players to the table to see what is good for our respective city, not what's been used in other cities.
Yeah. Well, Keith, when you talk about the Weed and Seed program, I'm gonna say DOJ, Department of Justice, that was they tried to design that program, Weed and Seed,
That was part
and
of the
what
war on
happened?
drugs.
Huh?
That was part of the war on drugs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
And what happened that came out of that was the incarceration rate of black men and people of color increased. So you had this weed and seed program. We're going to go in and we're going to weed out the drugs and other criminal activity. We're going to plant the seed to make this community better. But what happened is you went in and you did that and you arrested a lot of people for very low level offenses, such as, maybe a small little bag of marijuana.
Well, Virgil, let me say this. I was reading something today. I'm glad you brought that up. During the weed and seed era, we talked about zero tolerance.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the listeners and the viewers have heard that before, are familiar with that term. When you start talking about zero tolerance, then that pretty much means everything's on the table in order to reduce crime in areas. And even when you do that, that means everything is thrown, everything, you throw everything at everything. Minor traffic incidents, even people who are law-abiding people, they're going to be caught up in that, because
Correct.
nobody's going to drive around in this area with no front license plate, no insurance. We're going to write everybody. We're going to do this. And so it comes down to zero tolerance when you're talking about the violent crimes. A lot of the programs, when you talked about some of these programs were talked about, instead of realizing that there is a difference between a violent crime and a nonviolent crime. Now, we know that there are nonviolent crimes that, if not dealt with, that can evolve into violent crime. We understand that. But it's like I've always said, Virgil, when you take a 5 square mile area, you're looking at less than a mile, if you were to put it together, less than a mile radius that's causing all those problems. And so we don't get to the root of the problem. We try to pick the rotten fruit, but how do you stop that? Well, you got to treat those roots and you got to nourish that tree in order to get. You just can't automatically go in there and pull the rotten fruit and think that that's gonna make a big difference. There's a reason why the fruit is getting so. When we start talking about zero tolerance and things like that, we sometimes, I've seen that thrown into these programs, and officers not really understanding what that means.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, I want to remind those who are just now tuning into the podcast show, tonight's topic is our community outreach programs created by default or design. If you got, please join us in on this topic. If you got any questions, put them in the chat, and we'll definitely get to those questions. If you're streaming live with us on Facebook Live, or if you're streaming live with us on our YouTube channel, we thank you for tuning in and joining it. And if you're streaming live on LinkedIn, we thank you for joining us. And put your questions or comments or concerns in the chat, and we'll get to those throughout the podcast show. But Keith, when we talk about our community outreach programs created by default or design, I think there's one of the major pieces of this uh, that either can make a program successful or not successful are the police. Because if these officers are not uh, educated on why this is a need for this community, because Keith, as you know, I'm gonna probably say over 90% of the police officers who work in their communities don't live in those communities, don't come from those communities. And so if you didn't come from that community, and if you don't live in that community, how do you know how important these programs are? Because all of a sudden at roll call, your sergeant or your lieutenant or your captain is telling you, hey, this is a program that the city wants us to do. It's number one, it's going to give you some overtime, and that's all that really matters to some. Then you've got some officers who will buy into it and say, "Hey, this is a great program, and we want to make this program successful." But if you don't have that conversation with officers up front about the importance of these community outreach programs, they're not going to be successful.
Virgil, there are some departments out there that really don't know their communities, and what I mean by that is they know certain people that might be on the radar, but they really don't know. When you hear comments such as, "Well, that's just a bad area," uh,
Yeah,
everybody over there, they don't care about that area. That's so untrue and unfair. Because, like I said, you're going to have less than 1% of a population in that area that's causing problems. So don't let because someone's apartment isn't, it's not a $3,000 a month apartment, because they don't drive, it's not Mercedes Benz in those areas, or there's old amount of cars or kids. Right? You can't, you have to get past that and get to know the people. One of the things that I had a really good training officer when I was when I first got started, and he knew names of individuals. Hey, that's Miss
hmm
Johnson. Miss Johnson, man, she's been here for so many years. Miss Johnson raised 3 kids, and they all went to school. That's Mr. Smith. He's been living here 50 years. He had 5 kids. 2 of them end up in the pen. That's what I mean by getting to know your community
yeah,
and getting to know. She just so when you have that passion for that area, when you are a student of the profession, when you get down to the basics of what law enforcement is about, these programs can work because now your officers know what resources are needed, or or who can I go to in this community that's not afraid to talk to uh, police, who's not afraid to start a community watch group in this area. That's what it's about, in helping. I'm a strong believer that you have to have members of your community as some part of your planning as a police department. If you're going to start a special response team, as far as for those individuals who suffer from mental illness, to take away the uh, the heavy heavy-handed or the heavy appearance approach when you're dealing with someone with mental illness, you what is wrong with talking to some of the gatekeepers in the community? What would you like to see in our community outreach, community response programs? We don't do that because we feel as though as police chiefs that if we have to get assistance from those individuals, then people are going to think we don't know what we're doing. Well, it's not that. It's
yeah,
it's it's called groupthink, where we all come together and you value what people think,
yeah.
and the historical knowledge that they have. We don't do a good job at that, and that is why
Well, Keith,
these
let me ask.
programs fail. That's why
Yeah.
when I talk about default, that's what I'm talking about. We don't design effective programs in our community.
Mhm. Well, Keith, let me ask you this. Let's say, it's always good to collaborate and bring other voices to the table when you're trying to uh, change the quality of life, make things better in your community. Now, you bring all these people to the table. There's a lot of different uh, needs, or hey, we want to do this, or hey, this is a good idea, and nothing never really gets solved. But you've got a group of people who are saying this is what the community needs. And I always go back to, what is the data telling us? Is the
Hmm.
data there that shows that there is a need to have, let's say, a different alternative response to mental health calls? But if the data is not there and you're trying to implement something, is that program, is that a default program, or is that a design program? Because if there's not a if the data doesn't show that this is a need in that community,
Right.
but you've got people who are pushing for it, is that program going to be successful
It's a
short
failed
term and long term?
it's a failed program if you don't know how to pull the data. If you don't have the right people pulling the data. See, you've got to be able to know what your system is capable of doing. I'm a firm believer that, and it goes back to when we talk about default or design. When you talk about technology, because we have to use technology in everything that we do in law enforcement. So when you're talking about technology and it's time for you to buy a new CAD system, to the listeners, that's computer aided dispatch system slash records management system. So every call that comes in feeds into that, populates that system,
Yeah.
and that's how you input people's names, date of birth, all information, history of locations, and so on. The type of calls that you go on. If you don't have the right system, okay, and you don't have the people who understand how to utilize that system and
Hmm.
extract that information,
Hmm.
and you don't know what information that you're you don't know what information you're looking for, it's a failed um, project.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you all day, I can tell somebody all day, I need information on those individuals, return calls, or returning calls that we've had at 1301 Commerce related to someone or homelessness. If that call hadn't been coded right,
Hmm.
if it's just been a disturbance call and it hasn't been something related to someone who is in unsheltered, you can search that all day. So that's what I'm saying. You've got to know what you're looking for. You
You
got to
got to
know
have the
how
right
to
data.
look for it. Yeah, you got to have the right data. And because if you don't have the right data, how can you come up with a program?
Yeah.
I can tell you, and I hate to hear people guess. You can't, in our line of work as police executives, we can't guess at numbers. Okay, so when you make a presentation to the community about what's going on in that community, you can't say, oh well, we've had about. You got to
No, you
say
got
it.
to be pretty
Yeah,
specific.
you got to be, yeah,
Yeah.
approximately. But and so that's what happens. We don't educate our communities on how to report stuff,
Hmm.
that so we can extract information that will allow us to be able to design a program for our respective communities.
Yeah. Well, and Keith, one of the things, one of the things I've seen uh, throughout the country is that if there's a lot of money that's being put out there, and you've got this city receiving money, now you've got another city saying, well, hey, if they're getting a piece of the pie, we want some of the money. We can do something with this here. And if we don't have a problem, we're going to create uh, uh, a program because there's a trend that this may uh, happen in the next years, uh, ahead of you. But how can you determine that if the data is not telling you that right now? Because somebody can say, give an example. Somebody can say, well, hey, you know what? We're a growing city, and within the next 5 years, this particular city is going to change. The
Mhm.
demographics is going to change. So when that changes, that means you're going to um, inherit some of these crimes that you are not dealing with now. So you're trying
Right.
to project something in the future, and you're trying to implement something which, again, Keith, we go back to default or design.
It's not difficult, Virgil. It's called forecasting. It's called preparation. That's why, as a police chief, you have to be in tune with the census. You have to be in tune with the community development in your cities. You have to be in tune with if you have a university, because you have to look at that you're going to have 3 to 5% growth each year. And so now that's why a lot of cities have what's called 25-year plans. And as a police chief, you've got to look at, okay, if I have 3 to 5% growth, and even just say 1 to 2% on a bad year, but 3 to 5% growth each year on the average,
Mm-hmm.
what am I going to look like in 25 years? And if you want to keep your police departments at 1.5 and above per 1,000 citizens, this is what I have to do.
Yeah.
You have to ask the right questions when you're sitting at the table of, okay, what's the growth of the city? What's and you have to ask these city leaders, what's your vision for the police department or public safety? Um, I will tell you the one of the best ones I've seen was in Lancaster. Lancaster at the time was a 40,000 population of 40,000 citizens. They built a
And what is
new.
the population of Lancaster now?
It's probably about 45,000. Lancaster's a bedroom community, so but now with a lot of industry coming in. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
about forty five
Okay.
thousand. But what they did was they annexed about 5 to 10 more square miles. And so what you had to do was kind of look at the future. So what they did, the public safety building that we built, we built it out for a city of 65,000.
Okay.
So that means when you start adding additional officers, you don't have to go and build a new station. All you have
Yeah.
to do is add furniture and kind of reconfigure certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the things that you have to do. You purchase technology. We know that the average CAD system runs 10 to 15 years. You have to spend that money in order to meet those needs, which provides you with the information. But you have to be sitting at the table with the county, the state, the feds. You have to be a student of the profession to see, like I said, we talk about growth, we talk about um, council districts and things like that. Police chiefs have to get involved in that because if your city in Little Rock, we knew that the northwest part of Little Rock was growing. That was the only way the city could grow, and so we were anticipating building a public safety building out there, so a police and fire combination police and fire facility to meet the needs of the citizens out there because we
Mm-hmm.
knew that was going to grow. So then we started working on the reconfiguring the boundaries now to address the growth, and so as we grew, we would start adding more resources out there because we knew that's where the growth. You have to pay attention. When you pay attention, then you know what the problems are. You know what you can design. So a police chief designs. A police chief and his staff design what's needed. They pay attention to the growth. They pay attention to national trends. They don't try to copy what everybody else is doing in the neighboring cities because
Mm-hmm.
what's going on in this city, it could affect you, but at the end of the day, you're responsible for the growth of your city and
Yeah.
what the needs of your city are. So you can't in this job, you cannot. There are certain things you may be able to take canned and do, but you can't when you start talking about community programs, you have to design those programs based on the needs, the growth, and the resources that you have in your respective city.
Yeah. Well, and Keith, and I think it kind of goes back to something I said at the top of the show. And for those who are just now tuning into the podcast show, our tonight topic is: are community outreach programs created by default or design? And you may want to know, well, what are you guys talking about? What does that mean? Well, let's say you've got a city that says they have a problem. They know they've got a mental health problem, and they don't. Uh, they want to have an alternative response or a co-response to deal with mental health problem. The data shows that. And let's say you've got another city across the country who says, "Hey, man, they're doing some great. That sounds like a great program. They've got some money for that, and we can do some other things, but the data doesn't show that you have that same needs in that community. Well,
Hmm.
now you're just trying to default something other than saying, looking at your own community, saying, you know what, our officers are responding to about, on an average every shift. And let's say you've got, two shifts. They're responding to maybe ten calls uh, out of those shifts related to mental health calls. Now you see that you've got a trend going on. So how do you design or come up with a program to help implement or create a co-response model? Because now if you can design a co-response model that removes uniformed police officers, and you can work with mental health professions to respond to some of those calls, you design something that's going to definitely help with the mental health population in your city.
And
But
sustain it.
you've got to have the data has to talk to you to tell you that you have that problem.
I mean, some people don't know how to read the data.
Well,
And then, well, go ahead,
even
brother.
if you don't have the data, people are still saying, "Well, hey, this is works over here, so we need to do that over here." Well, no, you don't.
Well, and the other thing is that you have some chiefs that are afraid to use the data because it makes it seem as though their city has a problem. And it makes it seem
Correct.
as though their city has a problem that they can't address. Man, that doesn't make sense. You're going to have crime in cities. You're going to deal with our unsheltered community. You're going to deal with people who who suffer from mental illness. That's just facts. You're going to deal with people who travel in. Anytime you have a city that has a major highway in and has attractions, you're going to have crime. And so you have to be able to explain this is what I'm doing. They don't see it as if, man, we this gives us an opportunity to address this and maybe even ask for the resources we need. I remember a chief basically told me once that they didn't believe in saying anything about anything they weren't having any problems with because then it makes them have to do extra work.
Hmm.
And you know that you were at Noble in 2012 when I had that conversation about they
Yeah.
don't pay us what they pay us to make the easy decisions.
Yeah.
They pay us to design. They pay
Yeah.
us, there are times for me to sit here and say that I've never utilized something that was already um, to have that mindset of don't reinvent the wheel. Absolutely, I have.
Yeah.
But the majority of the programs that we utilize in departments that I ran were programs that we designed
Yeah.
because I wanted to be able to sustain them.
Yeah.
That's the deal. I want to
Yeah.
be able to sustain them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, hey,
I want to be able to sustain it.
just like say you've got a problem, the data is saying there is a human trafficking problem in your city.
Hmm.
With the arrests that are being made or just reports that are being taken, the data is showing that.
Hmm.
Now, how do you design a program, or how do you design enforcement to combat human trafficking?
Well, it's
Now,
simple. I'm
now,
sorry.
and I'm gonna take that same scenario, and let's say here's a city over here who says, "Oh wow, hey, we've had a few incidents, so now we're going to do something." Again, because you're thinking it's a trend that may come into your city, and it may not, but you've got people who want to jump on the bandwagon and say, "Hey, we need to do this. We need
Right.
to do this. We need to put in. Hey, there's this. We can get $300,000 for this. We can get $100,000 for this. We can get you know whatever amount of money it is. We can do this." And all of a sudden, how successful is that program? Because it's not going to really do anything to combat the problem at hand, which is human trafficking.
Well, let me say this. Also, there are resources already out there, but what happens, it goes back to sometimes leaders think that they have to do their own thing when it's easier to plug into someone else's. Case in point, human trafficking crimes, you're not going to be able to deal with those alone. So that's going
Hmm.
to be a city, a county, a state, a federal initiative. It is what it is, and it's gonna sometimes reach various states, and so you have to be in contact with others to determine what's going on and what they're doing, and can you work together because if it's happening in this area, it's affecting those individuals. And you know what? It's what we're finding out about human trafficking. It's not so much in the urban city. I mean, it's occurring in the urban cities. It's more out in the outlining
In
suburban
the
areas,
suburban and
rural
rural.
areas,
Yeah,
that this is really a big, this is where it's growing.
yeah,
But you have to know how to ask for help. You have to know where to go and ask for help. A lot of people just don't know how to go and
yeah,
what to ask for.
yeah,
It's that, man, if I ask for help, I'm going to look weak. And then the mayor or the city manager is going to say that they don't need me because I promised to make all these new programs and things like that. And it's just it's interesting. It's
yeah,
just it's disturbing.
yeah. Well, hey, Keith, I want to get to one of the comments in the chat. We've got you in 5-0. Definitely thank you all for tuning in to tonight's topic. And the comment in the chat from you in 5-0 is that one of the other issues is making sure community members understand what the data is saying and understand what they can ask for that allows them to drive how law enforcement is serving the community based on the needs that is driven by that data. Excellent comment.
That's an excellent comment, and we don't do a good job of explaining, and that's why it's important to have community data meetings where people can ask and explain. The time of us not sharing information, I mean, people understand there's certain things we can't share. We can't share covert information when it comes to certain investigations and stuff. But just because you put in, what I've seen is that we put stuff on our Facebook and our social media platforms. There's data initiatives out there where you can put in a zip code and find out, but that's all in good. But the community wants to hear from their police department, what's going on, why it's going on, what are you doing, how are you addressing it, and that's the best form of crime reduction that you can have when you're
Well,
letting people know what's actually going on, what you're doing, why these trends are happening.
yeah. Well, Keith, on another social issue, homelessness.
Yep.
You know,
Unsheltered
unsheltered,
population. Yeah.
the unsheltered population. And let's say you've got a pretty wealthy urban, a suburb city who doesn't really have an unsheltered population, but there are incidents where you may run across somebody who is unsheltered. They're in between cities. Now, would it make sense to say, hey, we don't have anything in our city that our officers can take somebody uh, uh, to to get them out of the weather or to get them somewhere where they can within 24 hours uh, get some other assistance. Instead of putting a program like that in place, we want to jump over here on something because somebody else is doing something because it looks good and we can stand up and say, hey, we did this, look what we're doing over here. But when you can have an impact on, even if it's just one person,
Yeah.
why not look to say, hey, you know what, we don't really have any kind of shelters in our community. Who can we partner with? Who can we help design a program that when our officers do run across somebody who needs that assistance, that there is a resource other than saying, well, hey, you can sit in the lobby for a couple hours until somebody come pick you up, or hey, we can take you over here and drop you off.
Right.
You're not really meeting the needs of that individual person or even maybe a family.
Well, I can tell you right now, there's always a church, there's always a nonprofit in areas that are willing to help. The two most underserved communities in the nation are our unsheltered and our communities that suffer from mental illness. The two most
Well, Keith, and
underserved.
you got to add in our veterans.
Yeah, well, our veterans, yes,
Yeah,
but a lot of our unsheltered veterans suffer from mental illness. But you're
yeah,
right. So
yeah.
and that was inclusive. But you're right. There's three: our veterans, our unsheltered community, and and our citizens who suffer from um, mental illness are
Yeah.
the three underserved communities
It,
in
it,
the nation, and
yeah.
we are called to address those individuals, and we have to find the resources. It's not that the resources are there; we have to a lot of times um, improvise on some of those in finding resources for some of these individuals.
Okay. Well, and Keith, and I think, as we talk about tonight's topic is our community outreach program created by default or design. What you just talked about those three underserved groups in communities, uh, but you don't really have some cities who are trying to design programs or design resources that will help with those situations. Other than here's a default, hey, somebody else is doing it. Let's get this money. Let's implement this here. And we all come around the table. Nobody can really agree on anything,
Right.
but everybody wants to get a piece of the money to implement the program. And I think that's another thing. When you have a group that is divided, how do you come to some resolution, Keith, that this is because at the end of the day, you can bring the community together. And this isn't knocking anything against community because we have to have the community with us as stakeholders. But at the end of the day, who's going to really be doing the work? Are the police officers going to be doing the work? Are these community actors going to be doing the work? Because you can bring all these people together with elected officials and everybody can make a decision, Key, to say, we're going to do this and we want you to do it. And then they walk away from it and that's it. So now police and other people are left trying to figure out, well, hey, we really didn't have a seat at the table. And if we did, we didn't have that much of a voice.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I have seen have too many of these conversations that never go anywhere, and then you're left to do it alone. And then when it fails or it's not going the way those individuals who are at the table saying it's a good idea, then everybody points it. And what we do as law enforcement, man, we take the hit on a lot of things, and that's why
Yeah.
I really believe in the community approach. When it came to violent crime, it's a public health issue. So when you make it a public health issue, you're bringing schools, you're bringing local, county, state officials together, you're bringing social services together, you're bringing nonprofits together. So you're bringing so many people together that no one can ever say, "Well, we didn't know." And out of all those individuals you bring to the table, somebody has something in place that you can start with. Someone does. Um, we you know it, you, I, we got to what we got to start doing. We talk about default or design. We have to stop doing these programs. And the Melanin Queen says it. We see a lot in the city that she resides in, where some elected board of directors seem to intentionally make it hard for programs to go forth, and even harder for activists to have access to resources to help. And I think that this does occur in some cities because you have those individuals that want to put their name on it. They if it doesn't meet their needs, and what they have planned, then it's not a good idea. Everybody suffers when that happens.
Yeah.
You know, instead of everybody sitting down, coming up with a program and say that this was an effort by everybody, you have individuals that wanted to say, this was mine. I did this.
Yeah.
Now, when it fails, it's somebody else's fault. But when it's successful, it's you know, and it's politics. It's a political part of it
And
that
that's the unfortunate part about that is that the politics.
it is
We got somebody in the chat who says the politics. When the
politics.
politics gets in the middle of something, these programs are almost destined to
They're
fail.
gonna fail and not get off the ground.
Yeah,
So that's
exactly.
it.
Yeah. Well, hey, man, we're coming up on the last few minutes of the podcast show, and once again, this has been another great topic. Talking about our community outreach programs created by default or design, and Keith, and I think a lot of conversation has to be put into when you're trying to. If there's a good intent, great.
Mhm.
But if you've got a group of people who are saying, well, hey, we want to be recognized because, yeah, we kind of have a problem, but we want to stand out. We want to be there with the other people. That's not benefiting the community. And again, if I go back to to me, Keith, the key to this is, what is the data telling you? Is the data telling you that you have a problem in your city? Just like what do we do when the data says you got a problem with traffic accidents? What do? We
We look at the
increase
data. Yeah,
increase traffic enforcement because the
we
data
do.
shows that.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, if it doesn't show that, why would we be out there trying to do traffic enforcement?
Well,
And so,
you have to look at the data too, because what we noticed also is that you'll have citizens that'll say, well, we had 20 accidents at this location. However, when you pull the data, it's not there.
yeah,
So there's where people may have had accidents, but they didn't call police.
yeah,
They exchanged information and moved on. So
yeah,
that's one thing you have to verify, that there is a problem, like you said. You
exactly.
perfect. And that's just an example of what happens when you don't, and you throw in good money, out after bad money.
Yeah. Well, hey, Keith, and to those listeners, we're going to revisit this topic because we want to bring on um, an, an expert who deals with community outreach programs out in Seattle. She wasn't able to join us on our podcast tonight, but I've reached out to her. She's a noble lady, uh, and for those who are saying she's a member of the organization that we're both members of, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and she is the director for the community outreach out in Seattle, Washington, and I think she will bring a lot more context to this conversation surrounding community outreach programs that they've done out there, and that what she's helped other cities around the country implement. So we're going to bring this topic back up in a future podcast. But Keith, and I think next week we've already kind of decided that we're going to be talking about human trafficking. You brought this up in our weekly conversations about podcast topics, and human trafficking is something that is really it has always been a concern, but in recent weeks, we've seen much more um, higher profile people being involved in human trafficking.
Yeah, and I think people think that means transporting people across state lines or transporting. Doesn't mean that at all.
Exactly,
It doesn't mean you don't have to transport anyone for them to be a victim of human
human
trafficking.
trafficking.
So we'll talk about that
Yeah,
next week.
yeah. Well, hey, brother, T Swaggy one, Swaggy man.
So
It's
man,
been
hey
good,
man,
brother.
hey man, I see you, man.
Man, put that flashlight down. We're not in no movie theater, man. Now you acting like
Hey,
you.
no, I'm just saying. I see you, man. I see you trying to get it right.
Hey, man. Hey, again, we want to thank everybody for tuning in to tonight's topic, and make sure if you missed any parts of this broadcast, you can go to our YouTube channel, you can go to our Facebook page, you can go to our Spotify, uh, Amazon Music, wherever you can find podcasting at, you will find You and the Law podcast. And if you can't find it, send us a message and let us know, and we will definitely make sure we get on that platform. But we want to make sure that you tune in next Thursday for another episode of You and the Law podcast show, streaming live every Thursday at 6 p.m. right here on Facebook Live and LinkedIn and YouTube.
Yeah, AV, and I want just before we go, I want to shout out to East Texas State University homecoming. Had a good time. To the D9 members, appreciate y'all, and looking forward to next year.
To next year's
And
homecoming, huh?
next year's homecoming, we had a good time, especially old school. Old school had a good time. So
All right.
appreciate y'all.
All right. All right. Well, hey, everybody, again, we want to thank you all for tuning in tonight to You and the Law podcast show. And we will see you next Thursday right here on Facebook Live at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time on You and the Law podcast show.